The rise and fall of great nations rarely follows a straight line. Instead, history repeats itself through patterns, predictable cycles that look unique while they unfold, yet match the same hidden script that destroyed every major empire before. Rome followed it, Spain followed it, the Ottoman Empire followed it, and Britain, whether we admit it or not, has been following the same seven-stage pattern for the last 200 years. This is not a story of doom. It is a story of how power really works, how wealth rises and fades, and how even the strongest nations collapse not because of foreign enemies, but because of forces building quietly from within. The story begins in the late 1700s, when Britain ignited the Industrial Revolution. This was the moment everything changed. Economists estimate that between 1760 and 1830, Britain's per capita income grew faster than at any other time in human history up to that point. Coal output tripled, textile production exploded, and by 1850, Britain controlled more than 40% of the world's manufacturing exports. This first stage, the rise of productivity, is where every empire begins. Rapid innovation, new energy sources, technological breakthroughs, and a population hungry for opportunity drive extraordinary growth. Britain had all of it. Steam engines, cotton mills, railways, shipyards, ironworks, and the world's most powerful banking centre in London. By the mid-1800s, Britain's navy controlled key global trade routes, and the pound sterling became the world's dominant reserve currency. At stage 1, every empire feels unstoppable. Britain was no different. But stage 2 begins when a nation becomes extraordinarily wealthy. Wealth creates confidence, and confidence creates expansion. For Britain, this meant building the largest empire in human history. At its height, the British Empire ruled over 25% of the world's population and more than 13 million square miles of territory. This expansion required enormous amounts of it. And so began the second stage, the debt-fueled expansion. Throughout the 1800s, Britain borrowed heavily to finance wars, colonies, infrastructure, the Royal Navy, and global administration. By 1900, government debt had risen above £700 million, an enormous figure for the time. But few questioned it, because the empire was booming. The profits from global trade appeared endless. This is how every empire enters stage 2, easy credit, national pride, and the belief that prosperity is permanent. Stage 3 begins subtly. Historians call it the plateau, a long period where growth slows, but the nation refuses to acknowledge it. For Britain, this began in the early 1900s. Germany and the United States were rapidly By 1913, the United States had already surpassed Britain in manufacturing output. British productivity growth began to slow as older mills, mines, and shipyards struggled to compete with more modern facilities abroad. London remained the world's financial centre, but the economy beneath it was aging. Still, Britain's political class carried on as if nothing had changed. This stage is always the quietest, but the most important. Empires rarely fall because of a single disaster. They fall because they cling to old successes, believing the world will stay the same. Then comes stage 4, the shock. Every declining empire faces a major crisis that exposes its internal weaknesses. For Britain, that shock was World War I. The war drained the treasury, destroyed a generation of workers, and pushed government debt to over 180% of GDP to finance the war. Britain borrowed heavily from the United States, ironically, from the country that was replacing it as the world's leading power. By the end of the war, the pound sterling had lost nearly 50% of its value, and Britain had shifted from the world's largest creditor to one of its largest debtors. This moment, the loss of financial independence, is a key feature of Stage 4. After WWI, Britain tried to restore its old glory by returning to the gold standard at its pre-war rate in 1925. But this decision, led by Winston Churchill as Chancellor, made British exports uncompetitive and contributed to the general strike of 1926. The empire was wounded, but the public still believed recovery was guaranteed. Stage 5 is where the decline becomes visible to everyone. It is the stage of overextension and exhaustion. For Britain, this came during World War II and the years immediately after. By 1945, Britain's economy was devastated. Government debt hit an unimaginable 250% of GDP, the highest level in modern British history. To survive, Britain accepted loans from the United States and Canada, including the 1946 Anglo-American Loan Agreement. The pound sterling, once the pride of global finance, continued to weaken. The Suez Crisis in 1956 is often seen as the symbolic end of British imperial power. When the United States refused to support Britain's attempt to retake the Suez Canal, the pound crashed, and Britain was forced to withdraw. This is classic Stage 5 behavior. The empire can no longer project power without foreign permission. Its illusions of dominance crumble. Stage 6 is what economists call the internal fracture. During this stage, the nation faces internal divisions, social unrest, political fragmentation, and economic stagnation. Britain experienced this throughout the 1970s. Inflation reached 25% in 1975. Unemployment climbed, and industrial strikes paralyzed the country. By 1976, the situation was so severe that the British government requested a bailout from the International Monetary Fund, the only time in history a major Western power has done so. This stage always reveals the same pattern: rising inequality, falling productivity, a sense of decline, and a search for someone to blame. Britain's manufacturing sector collapsed rapidly during this period and into the 1980s. Between 1979 and 1981, nearly 20% of all manufacturing jobs disappeared. Entire regions in the North, Midlands, Wales, and Scotland were reshaped by deindustrialization. The empire's wealth, engine its factories, shipyards, and mills had finally broken down. Stage 7 is the long decline. It is the stage where the country remains wealthy compared to the rest of the world, but never regains its former global dominance. Britain entered this stage sometime between the late 1990s and early 2000s. The economy shifted heavily toward finance and services. London boomed, but many parts of the country did not. Productivity growth slowed dramatically. In fact, between 2010 and 2020, the UK experienced its slowest productivity growth since the early 1800s years. Since the Industrial Revolution, real wages stagnated. Housing prices soared, particularly in London and the South East, where homes became more expensive than almost anywhere else in Europe. Meanwhile, the pound lost ground, falling from over $2 in 2007 to nearly $1.20 in recent years. The 2008 financial crisis hit Britain harder than most. The UK's banking sector had grown so large that at one point, British bank assets were more than 450% of GDP, an enormous vulnerability. After the crash, austerity policies reduced public investment, widening regional inequality. Brexit added further economic shocks, slowing trade and investment. By 2023, the UK's productivity level was nearly 15% lower than Germany's, and 20% below the United States. This final stage is not dramatic. It is gradual. Empires do not explode, they fade. They survive, but they no longer lead. So what does this 7-stage pattern mean for Britain today? It means the UK is likely somewhere between the late phase of stage 6 and the middle of stage 7. The country still has strengths: world-class universities, financial influence, deep cultural impact, and global alliances. But the structural weaknesses, slow productivity, high debt, chronic regional inequality, struggling public services, and political polarization show a nation wrestling with long-term decline. Every empire in history tries to reverse this stage. Some succeed for a time, others do not. The question for Britain is whether it will accept the lessons of history or repeat them. If history is a guide, the nations that escape decline tend to do 3 things. First, they reinvest massively in productivity, technology, education, research, infrastructure. Second, they rebuild trust in institutions by focusing on long-term planning instead of short-term politics. And third, they stop pretending that old systems will save them. The British Empire once reshaped the world. Today, Britain must reshape itself. The 7-stage pattern is not destiny, but a warning. Nations that ignore it collapse from within. Nations that confront it can rise again. For now, the pattern is clear. Britain followed the same path as Spain, the Dutch Republic, and other empires. Rapid rise, debt-fueled expansion, global dominance, overextension, shocks, internal fracture, and a long decline. But decline is not the end of the story. It is a crossroads. And the next chapter will depend on choices made today. If you found this journey through Britain's economic history revealing, make sure to like this video so more people can learn about the patterns shaping our world. Subscribe to British Economic Archives for more deep dives into the hidden economic forces behind history. And share this video with someone who still believes empires fall only from the outside. They don't. They collapse from within.